Welcome to this Master Series special event, Conquering Compliance, Workers' Compensation. I'm Becky Harshberger, Vice President and Payroll Tax Leader here at Entertainment Partners, and I'm joined today by our workers' comp expert, Richard Morgan, Director, Risk Solutions. Richard, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Becky. Thanks for the introduction and for dragging me into this. Always happy to share my workers' comp knowledge.
My expertise is on unemployment and disability. When an employee is laid off, they use unemployment to pay the bills until the next production starts. And if they get injured, not on the job, something unrelated to work, or they get ill, some states, they can collect state disability. But workers' compensation kicks in when an employee is injured on the job.
That's right. And workers' comp is unique to coverage for employment-related injuries. So when an employee is injured, the claim should be reported right away so that employee can get appropriate medical treatment. The workers' comp program covers both the medical treatment and lost time until that employee is fully healed or their condition have plateaued and able to return back to work in the event that employee was taken off work.
Tell us a little bit more about loss of wages and that until they are fully healed or plateaued.
Sure. So unlike unemployment or our state disability benefits that has a finite number of weeks someone can collect benefits, workers' comp in most states can continue until that employee is returned back to their full-time regular work or able to return back to work with some accommodations in the event that employee was given some type of work restrictions or limitations by the medical provider. As you can imagine, each state sets its own set of rules for the calculation of benefits, for example, that lost wage more specifically. And the length of time that the benefits can be paid out varies state to state. And depending on how long that is and the size of that rate, that can get real expensive very fast when an employee is off work and due lost time benefits. So workers' comp replaces that lost time wages while that employee is recovering. And again, depending on the state, if you look at California, for example, when someone is off work, they can be entitled up to 104 weeks of benefits for that specific injury. So in addition to that lost time, the coverage also includes providing medical treatment that's subject to what's called utilization review, much like and for some of us in our very much personal healthcare, depending on the plan that you have. Same for workers' comp, that there are instances or some states where that care is subject to the utilization review process to determine whether or not that treatment is medically necessary.
That's interesting, Richard. I didn't realize that, wages could be replaced, like in California, for up to 104 weeks. That's way more than unemployment. So, realistically, how long can a workers' comp claim last?
It varies. It kind of runs the gamut depending on the degree or severity of the injury that we're talking about here. Most claims that come in, I would say on average, they're about a 3 to 4 months, depending on, if it's a sprain, strain, or a laceration type of injury. But, those more significant injuries where you have someone with broken bones, or someone who falls off a ladder, those certainly carry higher degree of medical complexities to them, more diagnoses, more body parts potentially to treat. So it can take years for that employee to fully heal and able to get back to work.
So, I think you might remember a couple of years ago, my sister's case. She's not in our industry, but while at work, she fell from a scaffolding that gave way and she fell just straight down on both of her heels and she shattered her heel bones. And then, unfortunately, the scaffolding fell on her and she had face lacerations. And so through that process, they had to bolt together her heel bones until they fused together naturally. And then they had to take those bolts out. So she had multiple recoveries, is the best way to put it, where she had to learn to walk again. And she needed special boots and, the walker. And it was just a tremendous amount of effort to get her back on her feet, pun intended. And she really wanted to get back to work, but she needed accommodation. She couldn't stand for long periods of time, so she needed work accommodation too.
Yeah, no, that certainly was an awful experience for your sister, but I think a great illustration or example of what happens in the claim, all the different components that have to work together to make sure that the employee, from a work comp perspective, is taken care of and able. We always kind of, again, focus on the employee's ability to kind of get back to work, to kind of get back to their pre-injury levels. And, that is why it's so important that EP is the statutory employer from a workers' comp perspective. It allows us to stay very engaged in the claim process with our third-party administrator, the employee, the medical providers, to make sure that the employee is being taken care of and that they're getting the requisite care that they need to be able to get back to, and I always kind of say, as much as possible, to their pre-injury capabilities. In some instances, it could be very unfortunate that an employee was injured on the job and being unable to kind of get back to their normal state. So our focus in the work comp process is to get that employee back as close as possible to where they were before they were injured on the job.
Yeah, just listening to what my sister went through, it really gave me a new appreciation for how complex workers' comp can be and how tedious the administration of it. She works for a very small company, so they didn't really have an HR department or someone that, specializes in workers' comp. And, her employer was really supportive, but it was a lot of work on behalf of her manager to just keep the process moving forward for her with the insurance company and making sure everything was coordinated, the physical therapy, the walking boots, surgeon appointments, it was just a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine there are a lot of moving parts to the workers' comp system and in process. It's great to hear that she had an employer who was invested and dedicated to helping her. That is the best engagement, to be able to help employees navigate through a system and process that can create some frustration and anxiety for that employee. Most of the time, this is their first injury, their first time going through the process. So being able
Yeah.
to have some help, right? Being able to navigate the system is helpful. I think one of the things, when you look at state workers' comp programs, every state has their own unique set of rules, and it could be very bureaucratic, could be very red tape driven. And so with EP, we have a very strong workers' comp program in relationship with our insurance carrier and administrator that allows us to really leverage the program to make
Mm.
sure that our employees are taken care of, that they get the right care, they get the benefits that they're entitled to. And the way we try to accomplish some of that is by putting caps, for example, on the number of claims that our adjusters handle. The more claims that an adjuster have, the more likely that they're able to provide individual care to an employee. So recognizing that, we've structured our program in a way that allows our adjusters to have manageable caseloads, that allows them to be proactive, not reactive, when one of our
Mhm.
employees is injured and a claim is reported.
Yeah, my sister desperately wanted to get back to work. She was so bored at home. And I've heard the same about people out on productions. They want to get back to the production.
And I think that's true. I think, most people, when they're injured, they want to get back to work. And we certainly see it with our production employees, whether it's the phone calls and, the engagement. It's, how do I get back to work? What do I need to do? Is the claim administrator being proactive? Is the medical provider being proactive in terms of their treatment, right? That kind of, again, gets them back and put them in that path where they're able to return to work safely. As a program, we get very involved with our claims. And at EP, our team, we have oversight of our claims administrators, and we interact with our production clients and the injured employee, the medical providers, again, to make sure that the claim is being proactively managed and that we think it's on a good path for that employee to recover and, again, get back to work.
It's really interesting how in-depth the process is, but the other concern on the flip side of it is cost, right? And our billing rates have a strong effect on a productions budget. So, you know, you're talking about a lot of administration and then the medical costs. What is it that really drives the cost of workers' compensation rates?
Yeah, no, that's an important question, and cost is always a factor, right? Primarily, workers' comp is a highly regulated system in the states. The states mandate that employers, certainly employers of a certain size, have workers' comp coverage in place. That you have coverage placed with reputable insurance
Mm.
providers that meet certain guidelines. There are a handful of states out there where, in fact, you have to buy the insurance directly from the state, and those claims are self-administered by the state, which is a little bit
Oh,
different and more unique than a program that sits outside those specific states. Our business is such that we have claims in some of the most difficult states, right? When you look at
naturally, of course.
yeah, yeah. We go where our clients go, and that could be, whether we're talking about California, New York, Illinois. These are states that have specific rules about workers' comp. When you think workers' comp, it's not uniform across the country. Each
Mhm.
state has its own set of rules, and it's like, okay, California has 104 weeks of benefits. New York, that looks different. Illinois, that looks different. So trying to keep
Mm.
all of that straight is part of the challenge, or what makes the program complex. And when you have the expertise that EP brings to bear, helps us make sure that all of our employees, no matter where their claim is, that they are taken care of. I mean, I would also add, the other factor that impacts costs or price in here for workers' comp, it's the type of business, the type of industry you're in, the type of work, right? So the more arduous, the higher risk type work, that will carry some higher rates, just as a matter of course. And
Maybe like motorcycles going off of cliffs, just
yeah,
saying.
exactly, exactly. Or people falling off scaffolding. That
Yeah, yeah,
it's just to name a few. Just to name a
yeah.
few. And frankly, also the volume of claims. Right, the more claims you have, the higher your rate.
Mhm.
Rate will certainly will be a factor that's dependent on volume as well.
So, how does Entertainment Partners workers' compensation rates compare to other industries?
I think when you look at our average rates, you'll find that it is comparable to other industries, and indeed also in line within our business as well.
But still productions, they're just so cost sensitive.
I get it. I get it. But I would say, we are definitely competitive.
Mm.
At EP, we have a whole team that's focused around the workers' comp. At our administrator, we have dedicated teams to help make sure that we're getting the injured employee the right care and the best care to be able to get them back to work as quickly as possible, but safely at the same time.
Mm.
Certainly realize that these are probably two disparate goals, right? But we certainly are striving to make sure that that employee is taken care of, and at the same time balance the cost, right? Because we want to make sure that we
Mhm.
are controlling costs as to not impact the rates that we're setting on a go forward basis that could have an impact on clients. Something that we're very conscientious about, and we are very thoughtful in that process and that analysis of rate setting, because we want to make sure that we have a solid and sustainable work comp program that can support the entertainment industry tomorrow and years to come.
It seems like such a tough balancing act, you know? It's
Yeah,
too kind of disparate. Take care of the employee and make sure they're okay and keep costs under control.
it is. It is. And that's precisely why I think our clients appreciate and love our program at Entertainment Partners. We are responsible for the workers' comp claims. We're engaged in making sure that employees taken care of, that they're being positioned to be able to get back on the production. And I think this allows the production to focus on their core goal of producing a great product and doing it in a safe and healthy way, and allow EP to kind of navigate the complexities of the workers' comp process.
Just curious, how long can a workers' comp claim last? My sister's claim is still open and she was injured over 2 years ago and she's back to work.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's always the challenge. It's how long does a claim stay open, right? And it varies. It certainly varies dependent on the nature of the claim, the severity of the injury, the extent of treatment involved for that injury. But we're always focused on making sure that the employee gets the care that they need and are able to recover in a prudent way, right? We
Hmm.
certainly want to, on balance, we want to make sure that the employee gets the care that they need, but ultimately not at the disservice to that employee. We, again, strive to make sure that the right balance is there in terms of care and managing how long a claim stays open.
What they told my sister was that even though she's walking fine, because her injury was so brutal, that she may have issues as she ages. And so if she ever has any issues with her ankles, that the workers' comp claim would continue to cover that injury.
Yeah, and that is it's sad but a good example of what can happen in workers' comp, that an employee becomes entitled to those benefits after an injury, irrespective of how long it might take for them to recover. But certainly sounds like your sister's company was very involved and engaged in making sure that she gets the care, and in the event any issues that might come up, that they will be right there by her side.
Speaking of that, just curious, because it is a small company, what happens to her coverage if the company closes?
That's a great question. And that's why they get insurance, right? That's why there's an obligation on employers to get insurance. Because even if that employing company closes for whatever the reason, the insurance company remains on the hook
Oh,
for the
okay.
claim, right? And for administering the benefits. That's why, you kind of see when you look at the insurance regulations out there and guidance, it's quite thick. And it's precisely to make sure that insurance companies are being responsible, that they're then able to remain solvent and then able to take care of any of their financial obligations that they might have had with an employer under their workers' comp policy.
Okay, I get it. That's why it's called insurance, right?
Yes, insurance.
So,
Yes.
so speaking of regulatory guidance, what happens when a company doesn't have workers' comp insurance and a worker gets injured?
Sure, equally good question. That's why it's very important that work comp coverage is in place, because if an employee is injured and it's deemed that it's a work-related event, the employer is not off the hook. The employer remains responsible for full freight and penalties of providing benefits to that employee. So in terms of loss of wages, medical care, all of that remains the responsibility of the employer. The advantage of having that workers' comp program in place is, for like California, when I mentioned the 104 weeks cap
Hmm.
that applies, or the utilization review process to control medical costs. If work comp is not in place, those levers are not available, right? I think in addition to the benefits that you have within a workers' comp policy or program, is that they're potentially exposed to a civil lawsuit for tort damages that could carry exposures for unlimited damages, for like physical damages or emotional distress, loss of wages, just to name a few. So it is quite important that that work comp is in place, because it really protects the employer from exposures that might have otherwise been avoidable.
Yeah, all
Um,
the above and beyond.
yeah, exactly right.
Yeah,
Exactly
yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's exactly the part of the reason, again, that the value that EP brings in terms of our work comp program, that we bring to the table the expertise to carefully manage the work comp, both for that injured employee, but also doing it in a responsible way that allows us to manage the cost of the program.
I learned way too much about workers' compensation by watching my sister go through this. And thanks for answering all my questions back when it first happened. It was really great to have someone like you with your depth of knowledge to just confirm in her mind that everything was going according to the way that it should go for a workers' comp claim. It just was such a foreign place to have ended up for her and for her company. I mean, they just had never had a claim before, and this was a pretty bad one. So I think it's really great to have such a depth of experience. And I know you have longevity with the people in your department. At Entertainment Partners, a lot of people stay a long time, but your department has some really strong long-term employees too.
That is true. I mean, workers' comp is very dynamic, right? And again, where we have clients all over the country, right? California, New York, Illinois, with all their unique set of rules and responsibilities for providing notices, specific notices,
Mm.
for example, to an employee. We've established those relationships with our clients. They know us, we know them, in being able to connect, to talk through what's required here, what do I do here, are some of the conversations and
Mhm.
interaction that we're having almost on a daily basis. So, again, always happy to share what we know, what I know. And, I hope your sister continues to do well.
Thank you. She's really an inspiration. She's really dedicated to getting back on her feet permanently. Pun intended.
Indeed, indeed. Well, Becky, thanks for the in-depth discussion today. To wrap us up, when there's an injury on a production, report the claim. It's important that we get ahead of making sure that employee gets taken care of and gets the medical care that they need to put them on the right track to being able to get back to work. You can always reach out to our risk solutions team at claims@ep.com. That's claims with an S at ep.com. You can also call us at 800-955-4878. Thanks again for your time, and we're always here to help.